Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to GSC's July Travelogue. I'm Joe with the GSC office, and I'll be moderating today. Our presenter is Derek Barthel, and he'll be presenting on Mexico City. Derek is a 2016 graduate of the Geography and Environmental Studies Master of Arts program at Northeastern Illinois University, where he researched the effects of tourism on forest cover in protected areas of Colombia. He currently works at Smokeball, which is a legal tech company and has extensive experience at geospatial technology companies and nonprofits. Derek enjoys international travel, scuba diving, surfing, and spending time with his wife, his cat Ramon, and his dog Coconut. Before we begin, to all our attendees, just with your questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will review them at the end and answer them. Derek, thanks again for being here, and go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
All right. Thanks everyone. Like Joe said, I'm Derek. If you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. But I'm going to take you through a little trip to Mexico City. I've actually been to Mexico City. I counted it out earlier today, 7 times. The first time it was 10 years ago in October of 2016. And I've gone back uh, almost annually ever since. As we'll find out, it's a very easy place to get to, easy place to navigate, affordable and really cool. So it's on my list of places if I've got a long weekend or I don't have plans for Labor Day or Memorial Day or something like that, and there's a good flight deal. It's easy to just swing down there. Um, so what I'm going to take you through today, these are the categories. I'm going to talk a little bit about getting there. And then we're going to break this down sort of by neighborhood, starting with the historical center of the city, and then fanning out to Chapultepec Park, Polanco, La Condesa, Roma, Coyoacan, and then some day trips just outside of the city or on the further flung edges of it. I always like to talk food specifically, so I've got a few slides for you on that, and then some rough costs, and then we'll end with the Q&A. Um, just to situate ourselves geographically, as we like to do, obviously you can see Mexico City right here. It's in the center south of the country. It's below, a lot of people have this idea of Mexico as maybe one of two different things. One, either the big desert in the north, or maybe one of the coasts over by Cancun with the crystal blue water, or on the Pacific side with the big waves and surfing and everything. Well, Mexico City's far enough south that it is hot, but it's also high up in altitude, so it's not sweltering. It's not a desert environment. If you get outside of the city, it does take on a little bit of those desert qualities. There's cactuses and stuff, but it's not like you see in the movies. It's quite a green, lush place. There's plenty of rain, and it's not sweltering typically because of that altitude. So it's a very pleasant, sort of almost Mediterranean climate. Very agreeable. Here's a zoom in of the city itself. Some of the places of note. Obviously, you situate yourself firstly with the airport over there in the top right, the historical center just to the left of that. Over further westward, you'll see Roma and then Polanco and Chapultepec, which are sort of clustered together. And then down further south, there's Coyoacan, which we'll go to as well. These are all within roughly an hour of each other. There's a lot of traffic, so it would be a lot less than an hour if you're driving between places off hours, or maybe taking the subway. But maybe an hour between, say, Roma and Coyoacan in the more traffic parts of the day. And then zooming out, all those places in the previous slide were, right around those words, those bold words, Mexico City in the middle. But to situate ourselves a little more, we'll be talking about Teotihuacan, which is in the north, Xochimilco, which is technically in the city, but it's in the far southern edges of it, and that's that circle in the middle there. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about Tepoztlan, which is another day trip down south. So logistically from Chicago, it's a lot simpler than some of my previous presentations that you know me for, if you remember my past ones and you've attended. This one's just a direct flight. It's roughly 3.5 to 4 hours from O'Hare. There's 7 direct flights a day. There's a couple low-cost carriers that range in the. It used to be about 200. Nowadays, I'm seeing more like 300, 400 round trip. And then there's the legacy carriers, United, I think American, and then Aero Mexico, which is a little nicer too. Well, not nice, but you know what I mean. And those tend to go for a little more, 500 to 600, depending on the days and the seasons and so on. Um, I used to be able to get reliably round trip tickets for $200 to $250 from the low cost carriers. Those days seem to be behind us. But nevertheless, the numbers never really skyrocket. So you can get flights in this range pretty reliably. Um, there's no visa to enter. You just need to bring your passport. They did streamline this process. It used to be that you had to fill out the piece of paper, hand it to the agent. They'd hand it back to you, and you'd have to keep it. The last time I went, they had that process in place for some random people, including me. But most people were getting by with just the facial recognition technology, and they weren't even, you didn't even see an agent. You just walked straight into the country after your face was scanned. I still had to keep the little paper. So you might be randomly selected to do that. Just to keep in mind, the little piece of paper just has your information on it. And if you don't present it upon leaving, you get charged a nominal fee, like $50. So hold on to it if you do get issued um, the paper so you don't get a ticket. And then, yeah, straight from the airport, there's 2 terminals, and depending on your airline, you could fly into either one. So I won't give any specific advice about where to go to get the taxi, but the signage is all good and it's all relatively simple. This last time I went, I walked out and there was obviously the taxi, the official taxis, and then there was signage that said rideshare pickup just outside of immigration and customs. And I was able to snag an Uber to my destination, and I want to say it was something like $15, and it took roughly 40 minutes from the airport to some of those neighborhoods we'll be talking about. So pretty easy. We'll start here in the center of the city. So a little bit to know about Mexico City, if you don't know anything about the history. Obviously, when the city was founded. It was founded by the Aztecs, aka the Mexica or Triple Alliance, um, on an island in the middle of a lake. And over time, the island expanded. The lake was filled in, and the only remnants of the lake that are left today, more or less, are in Xochimilco, which we'll get to later. And I'll bring this topic up again. But the reason this is important for now is because the original site is this historic center, and this is where the Aztec temples and sort of center of their city existed. So this is the original island landmass. When the Spanish arrived and did all the stuff they tore down basically all of the Aztec architecture and used the stones to rebuild, things like this cathedral in the background and various government buildings and so on that line this plaza. Um, you can see the stones, obviously, from this like desecrated temple that were used in the buildings in the background that the Spanish uh, built up. Um, Here in the historic center, there's a huge plaza that has cultural events and like political rallies and so on that are right in front of that church. Behind the church, there's a museum. This is dedicated to the last remaining remnants of one of the Aztec temples, which you can see here in the foreground. And it's a relatively small complex, and there's a small museum attached to it. But it's a nice way to spend an hour or so if you're in this neighborhood. Um, Another thing down the street from here is this. It's called the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Palace of Fine Art, and inside there's a lot of murals and artwork and so on. This is famous as a pretty attractive building, and in fact, across the street from this, there's a couple rooftop cafes that people like to go up and spend too much money on a coffee for just to get a view from atop. I've never done that, as you can see my pictures from the ground. But it's a relatively famous building, and it's right down the street in this sort of historical center neighborhood. One thing I should say too about this neighborhood is it's not my favorite. It's very downtown city hustle and bustle grid, not as green as other neighborhoods. So it gets a lot of that urban heat. Um, and it's just not, in my opinion, a pleasant place to walk around. So I do treat it like a touristic place where I want to see, if I want to see a museum or a specific event or something, I might go there, but it's not somewhere I go every time I go to Mexico City. But that being said, if it's your first time there, it's worth a morning or an afternoon to see the plaza, which is called the Zocalo, and maybe this building and a few other small places. And the last thing I'll note about the Zocalo, which is that central plaza in front of the cathedral, is that um, there's a few bars and restaurants that line the Zocalo that you can go into and then get a nicer view of the plaza. But I would really recommend looking at the reviews because some of them are nice and decent, and other ones are just complete ripoffs. Um, so just make sure, and they have people standing outside that, they have a menu and they're welcoming you in and they say, oh, you can get a nice view. We've got, food and drinks, come on in. So you might be tempted, but there's literally one, for example, I forget the name of it, but you can look at it on Google Maps and out of like 2,000 reviews, it has 1 star, which seems impossible. Um, how can it stay in business? But it's because I think people just don't do their research and they go up there. And then if you look at the pictures of the food they're serving, it's just awful. So don't fall victim to that. Just if you're gonna do that, which is worth a couple of drinks or appetizer or something, if you want to get a nice view, just make sure you're picking a nice one. Speaking of history, we won't dwell on this too much, but you may be familiar with Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Well, after Fidel was sort of exiled from the Cuban dictatorship, he landed in Mexico. Che Guevara was making his sort of motorcycle diaries historic journey northward through South America and then Guatemala, and then wound up in Mexico City where he met Fidel Castro, where Fidel was planning the what eventually became the armed wing of the Cuban Revolution, and he had a small contingent there, and Che met up with them, and they hit it off, and that's where Fidel was when he asked Che to join the landing party. And the apartment where they did a lot of this planning is in this neighborhood with a plaque on it where you can see where they lived, and then obviously also these statues. So it's not just that ancient history of like the Aztecs and the Spanish arrival, but also something a lot more modern, all in this neighborhood. So moving on from that historic center, they've got Chapultepec Park, which is, if you've ever been to New York City and you're familiar with the idea of Central Park, it's somewhat similar to that. It's just a huge green space with a lot of different things going for it. There's ponds and lakes, trails, people run through it. There's food carts and people selling souvenirs. And there's even a castle in the middle of it that was built by Europeans. I think Mexico was briefly ruled by an Austrian or Hungarian king, Maximilian, and I think the castle was commissioned for him. Anyway, it still stands today. Um, I've been there once. It was a long time ago. Obviously, I don't remember the full history of it, but it is now a museum, and it also has a nice view. So it's on a hill in the middle of the park. You can walk around this park. You can walk across the entire thing in 20 to 30 minutes, or you can get lost and just walk up and down all of it over the course of a full, morning or afternoon. It's a pretty pleasant respite from, the hustle and bustle of the city itself, and you feel like there's a lot of people there too, but because of the greenery and the wide open spaces, you feel like you're outside of the city. So it's just a nice place to be. The first time I was here, I was actually here during Day of the Dead. You're probably familiar with this holiday. Day of the Dead is relatively regional in scope in Mexico. It's not celebrated across the entire nation to the same degree. Mexico City, it's a minor holiday, but there are still celebrations for it that you can find. And I was walking around this park on Day of the Dead, and there was a bunch of people that were doing, decorating and costumes and so on. And I snapped a few photos, including this one. So if you're there during Day of the Dead, it's a nice place to go see people showing off what they're putting together for the holiday. Um, just to the west of this park is the neighborhood called Polanco, and this is a an upper class neighborhood. It's swanky. It's where there's nice restaurants and bars that are on the upper end of the budget for Mexico City. But first and foremost, it's where the Anthropology Museum is. This is one of the best museums I've ever been to in the world. It's a gigantic complex of regional basically cultural relics from all over Mexico, Mexico's indigenous population, not just the Aztecs from the Mexico City area, but also like the Mayans and the folks from Oaxaca and the folks in the north of the country and so on and so forth. So it's a great way to spend some time. I've been there 3 times and I still haven't seen the whole thing. Um, I'd recommend spending at least 2 hours, but knowing you're not going to finish. If you wanted to finish the whole thing, it would probably take a good at least 4 to 5 hours. I've been there collectively now for probably 6 hours, but I always start in the same room and give up around the same time. So there's a couple rooms I still haven't seen. But it's really spectacular. And all I think to myself the whole time, like, is, if this was the stuff that survived, that like the Spanish decided wasn't worth destroying, like I can only imagine what um, these pieces of art and architecture and cultural, artifacts looked like when they first arrived, and what could have been if they weren't destroyed. Something to ponder. This is in the park just outside of the museum. I just thought it was interesting as a picture. I just dragged and dropped in here because the squirrels there are different than the ones here. They've got this reddish copper hue, and they're all over the place, and they'll take food straight out of your hand if you want. I didn't do that. The squirrel was just hanging out, but they're all over, and they're pretty cool looking. I talked about fancy restaurants a moment ago. So in Polanco, there's a bunch that make like that, top 50 restaurants in the world list, or whatever your metric is for determining these things. I've been to a couple, one of which I don't remember the name. It's since closed down, and then the other one is Pujol, which is pretty famous. A lot of folks used to throw around that this had like Michelin stars, but that's not true. It might today, but Michelin didn't exist in Mexico City until very, very recently. So there is no such thing as Michelin stars in Mexico City until recently. They might have one now. I don't know. I haven't been keeping up, but that wasn't true until like the last year or so. Anyway, this is one of those places where you go and you get like a 10, 12 course meal, and you can choose to do like the wine pairing or whatever, and it's all phenomenal and spectacular. Um, Here in Chicago, a similar experience would run like $600 or whatever. But back when I went to Pujol, I went admittedly like 8 years ago, but it was only like $100, 120 maybe. I'm sure it's more than that now, but it's still way better than price wise than what you'd get here in Chicago. So it's worth checking out if you've always wanted to do a restaurant like this, but didn't have the budget for one here at home. This is just one dish, and admittedly, like not the most attractive looking, but it's noteworthy because so this is their mole course. Mole is this really complex, rich sauce, essentially. In fact, mole is Nahuatl for sauce. Guacamole, for example, means avocado sauce in Nahuatl. It's this really complex sauce with like a few dozen ingredients that takes hours and hours or days to make. And in fact, here, what they do at Pujol is the old mole, which is the darker brown one, that's been cooking for however long the restaurant's been open. So a 10-year-old mole that's just been constantly churning. And then they make a new batch of mole every day or week or something. And that's the dollop in the center. And then when that batch is finished, they mix it into the old mole. And then they give you this tortilla made out of a leaf here. and which is supposed to be sort of like taste neutral, and then you can try the difference between the old mole and the new mole and see how they compare. So it's a really sort of fascinating, thing to experience. This photo I threw in just to give you a sense of scale. This is like the Zona Rosa area. I stayed in an Airbnb here once. This was the view from my Airbnb. I've stayed in a few different neighborhoods. This one is a good central neighborhood to stay. It's got a lot going on for it, but it's one of the less green, more hustle bustly places. But it is where all the tall buildings are. So just to give you a nice view of that. But speaking of green, going back to that, the most famous, I think, for as far as tourists are concerned, neighborhoods in Mexico City are Roma and Condesa. These are sort of twin neighborhoods right next to each other, the way we might think of like Wicker Park and Bucktown here in Chicago. You can walk interchangeably between the two. There's no like strong, I mean, there is a border, it's a specific street, but all you have to do is cross the street and you're in one or the other. And there's just tons of cafes and cocktail bars and restaurants. This is a very easy place to get along as a tourist because, well, there's a lot of tourists there, so a lot of the people speak English who are, going to be helping you out and asking you if you want a table or if you have a reservation or whatever. The food tends to be very good, eclectic. One of the questions I imagine I would get is how varied is the cuisine in Mexico? And the answer is like, well, it's not as varied as Chicago in the sense that I would say I'm gonna guess like 80% of the restaurants are, Mexican food, but that other 20%, they've got everything. They've got, Japanese, Chinese, they've got buffalo wings, burgers, pizza, whatever, Italian. Um, well, in Roma and Condesa, the concentration of that variety of restaurants is higher, I think, due to the fact that there's so many tourists and they're trying to mix it up. Um, but all that to say, there's a lot of great food here. That being said, there's also a lot of like mediocre food that's overpriced. Um, just by virtue of it being like an attractive storefront or whatever. So just once again, do your research. The few times I've skipped some sort of research and just sort of wandered into a place, it wasn't always the best. So make sure you're doing that. I mean, unless you're just going there for the atmosphere, then fine. But don't expect the food to be amazing if you just wander into a random place where nobody else is hanging out. Um, and yeah, like I was saying, this is a lot more green. I guess this photo doesn't do it justice, but this neighborhood's very green. It's lined with all these sort of boulevards with old, tall, big trees. So it's very shaded and just green and pleasant to walk around, which also is probably a reason that it's very touristic. And then if you're hanging out, on one of the tables on the sidewalk or street, you'll probably get buskers that come up and sing a couple songs, and you're free to tip them or request a song if you want. So it adds to the atmosphere as well. Just a really nice place to walk around and hang out. And then as far as neighborhoods go, the last one I'll highlight here is Coyoacan. I like this neighborhood a lot. It's more far flung and less central than the other ones we've talked about. All the other ones we've talked about so far, you can jump in an Uber or a taxi and be in one or the other within 20 minutes. Coyoacan's about 45 minutes to an hour south of all of these other places. Um, so it is sort of an island into itself in that sense, but it's a great island to wind up in because it is almost like its own mini town. There's a central plaza with the church and like community and cultural events happen there. It has its own market. Restaurants and cafes and bars line the plaza, and then fanning out from there, the neighborhood itself is quite green and walkable and nice. So um, you could spend a day there and have a great time. What it's most famous for and what most tourists go there for is the Frida Kahlo Museum. Every single day, this opens at 10, and there's a long line wrapping around the corner leading up to the opening time. This is the sort of thing you have to buy tickets for in advance because if you just show up, they're going to be sold out for the day, basically every single day. But if you like Frida Kahlo, if you like her style of artwork, if you want to see, I think this is actually where she lived. Um, and they preserved some of the rooms and so on, exactly how she lived in them. It's small though, so you could probably get through the whole thing in an hour or two. I went once, and it was nice enough. I don't feel compelled to go back anytime soon, but I can see why others think it's really nice. Another museum that is in the area that's related to the Frida Kahlo one, if you know the history, but it's much smaller and less frequented, is Trotsky's house. In fact, this is the room where Trotsky was assassinated. If you don't know that history, he was, I think, exiled from the Soviet Union because he had a rivalry with Stalin, and then one thing led to another, and Stalin issued a order for him to be politically assassinated. And sure enough, here in the bedroom, somebody came up behind him with an ice pick and stabbed him, and that was the end of Leon. Um, and his house is preserved, and it's a nice little museum as well. So I recommend that. It's all walking distance within the small neighborhood of Coyoacan. Oh yeah, and then right next to the plaza, there's these buses that are just parked there, and they basically wait for folks to get on until they have enough people, and then they take off, and it rolls you around the neighborhood for about an hour, and the person in the front gives you the whole history of the neighborhood. Um, I don't remember. I'm not going to go through all of it here, but it tells you when it's founded, who are some famous people who contributed to it being built. There's some urban legends about ghosts and so on, and it's just I think it's pretty cheap. It's like $5, and they just roll you around. So it's a nice way to get off your feet and see the whole neighborhood with somebody explaining to you what's going on. All right, on to our day trip portion. Xochimilco, there's two ways to visit this. And this one, where do I start? Okay, so I mentioned in the beginning that Mexico City is basically a filled-in lake bed. Um, it used to be a series of canals. Well, it was a lake, and then it was a series of canals, and then all the canals were filled in with land. But Xochimilco still has that canal structure to it. You can see one right here. People live on the banks of these canals, and they farm there too. Um, there is a touristic infrastructure there. The way most tourists go to Xochimilco is there's these boats there, and you can rent one for X number of hours, and then you can party on it. You can bring a bunch of beer, tequila, whatever, and then there's other boats that the people will be making food, or there'll be a mariachi band, and you can ask them to pull over and sing you a few songs, and they'll pay you a fee. And then you're just out on the canals with a bunch of other boats, sort of partying it up and saying cheers, and it's a nice jovial atmosphere. But the other way to that I've never done that actually. The other way to enjoy Xochimilco, and I've done this twice, is if you go there first thing in the morning to the not the party area, but like it's a pretty wide open space. So there's different parts of it, but you can do like an ecological kayaking tour or rowboat or whatever. And I've done this twice, gone out there at the crack of dawn, and you see the mist roll in, and all the birds are like getting up for the day. You can see the fish splashing around in the water, and you see the sun rise. And if you have a nice clear day, you can see it rise over the volcanoes that flank Mexico City. So it's a very dramatic atmosphere. And once again, you feel like, except for maybe the occasional roar of like a ambulance in the distance, you forget you're in a huge metropolitan area. And then Xochimilco is a neighborhood, not just like the canals, but it's also the name of the neighborhood that surrounds the canals. And this is also a historic place. I took this picture because this is the building. Hold on. Where Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata first met and forged an alliance during the Mexican Revolution. Um, and there's a little central plaza here with a statue of the both of them, and so on. So if you're interested in the history of the Mexican Revolution about 100 years ago, um, this neighborhood has a lot of that going for it too. Okay, another day trip. This is about an hour and a half south, depending on where you are, an hour and a half to 2 hours south of Mexico City. But this is a small town. Mexico is this series of towns called Pueblo Mágicos, which are it's like magical towns that the government's designated, sort of like a UNESCO style thing, where there's some ambience and heritage associated with it that they want to preserve. That adds to like the grandeur and the beauty of Mexico and its history and culture. And they designate the towns with this status, and they become sort of like tourist destinations by virtue of having that status. But also, they earn it by being pretty cool places. So this one, Tepoztlan, is a small town about 2 hours south that it's flanked by this like series of dramatic cliff faces. And on the top of the plateau there's I can't remember, to be honest, if it's Aztec or some civilization that predates the Aztecs. I think it's the latter. But there's a temple up there. So you get to the town and it's this nice atmosphere. You can see the old cathedral there and then shops and bars and restaurants. But then you can hike up that mountain. And if I remember correctly, it took like an hour, hour and a half. And then at the top, there's a nice view and an old ruined temple, which isn't in itself that spectacular. Obviously, the view I think is better than the temple itself, but the temple is nice too, and the history is interesting. Um, so this is an easy place to get to if you have a car or you want to hire a driver and just see something outside of Mexico City that's easily accessible. And then lastly, in terms of the day trips, Teotihuacan, this one is pretty well known. You've probably heard of it. This is a civilization that well predates the Aztecs. There's two big pyramids. One I'm standing on in this photo, and then the other one you can see there. And then there's this Avenue of the Dead. So you start at one end, and then you walk through and sort of experience the avenue. There's vendors all over the place that are selling little trinkets and stuff. There's a couple interesting anomalies, like if you see sort of 9 o'clock, there's that small group of folks clustered. So if you stand there and you yell towards that other little pyramid, there's an echo that comes back. So it's, there's things like that. That big temple in the background there on the left, you can see there's people at the top. They don't let you do that anymore. This photo, I've been here twice. This photo I took in 2016, and I just went back here for the first time since then a few weeks ago, and they don't let you go up there anymore, which is a shame, but I'm sure they have their reasons. And then the one I'm standing on in the photo, you can only go halfway up because it's not restored and the steps aren't, you'd probably fall or something. Anyway, this is about an hour and a half northeast of the city. You can either hire a driver or you can take an Uber up here. I looked both ways. I wound up hiring a driver just for the ease of it. I had a medium-sized group, but I did look up Uber prices, and it was about $35 each way before tip. And there were Ubers there waiting for people to order to go back to the city, so it's quite easy to do without having to think about too much. Oh yeah, and I put this in here. So Lucha Libre is fun. This is every like Thursday and Sunday night. There's probably more nights. I don't know exactly the schedule, but at least Thursdays and Sundays. Um, there's a specific arena in Mexico City that does this, and it's just a good, cheap, fun time. I think I paid like $15 for these tickets in the near the front row. If you go further back, the tickets are like $2, $3, $5. I've done this twice as well. It's like a stage play, like it's scripted, it's quote unquote fake, like, WWE style wrestling. But the wrestlers are tremendous athletes and they're doing all kinds of flips and moves and stuff, and the crowd gets really into it and cheers, and it's a pretty cool atmosphere, and I do recommend it. Obviously, this photo was taken during the Day of the Dead when I was there for that. So you get this extra splash of, you can see the ref in the middle has got the skull makeup on, and then those guys in the background are all dressed up like it's Day of the Dead. So if you're there for Day of the Dead, it's another little extra cool thing to do. Okay, so moving slowly into that food category, there's markets. Every neighborhood has its own market. Some are bigger than others, but Mercado San Juan, which is near the historic center, and the Coyoacan market are two like easy ones. They generally look like this. There's the fruit and vegetable section. There's a flower section. There's a raw meat section. If you're staying an extended period and you want to buy some groceries for your Airbnb, it's a great place to go to stock up. Um, and then there's always little places to get some cooked food as well. Some markets are known for specific things, like the Coyoacan market is known for whatever reason for seafood and tostadas and ceviche. So that one you might go there for that specifically. So if you're going to go to a market, just look into it in advance and see what they're known for, and then try to gravitate towards that. Um, yeah, just again, moving into that food section, all over the place. There's street food, there's vendors, there's people with carts with pre-prepared food or food that they cook in front of you, food that you can take away to eat while you're walking or take home. There's no shortage of interesting things to eat. Many things you'll know, tacos, enchiladas, whatever, that everybody knows, but other things you might not know, like this on the left, bottom left here with the limes, these are dried grasshoppers. And you can get those, a little baggie of those mixed with like pumpkin seeds or dried fruit or whatever, and be on your way. And it's all pretty affordable and easy to take away. Dried grasshoppers aren't as wacky as you might think. Obviously we don't eat them much here, but the second you taste one, it's not that big of a deal. It's sort of like a peanut. It tastes like a peanut. Not much difference. I don't love them, but maybe you will. Yeah, there's another photo of just like you can go up to this guy and he's making like huaraches or something. So he cooks up this blue corn tortilla and then on top of it adds some, meat or cheese or vegetables or whatever. He cooks it to order, and then you can sit down and eat it right behind him or take it to go. This stuff is rarely expensive. Something like this might cost like $2 to $4, and it'll fill you up. A lot of the taquerias and stuff, like the official quote unquote restaurants that aren't like street food, will have open storefronts. So even from the street, you can like observe the chefs cooking up the food and putting it together, such as this. Um, oh yeah, this was interesting. So this is chilaquiles, which you may know. It's a breakfast food. It's essentially um, so any like corn tortillas from the night before that don't get eaten and they turn kind of stale overnight. They get fried up into, I mean, what we would call tortilla chips, right? That's what they are. And then mixed with like some leftover sauce, and then you crack an egg on it and add accoutrements, and like that's your breakfast based on the leftovers from last night. Um, I always get this for breakfast when I'm out there. It's nice. It's got a like spicy zip to it, and then in this one I got, you can see a fried egg, avocado, and goat cheese. So there's all kinds of stuff you can get added to it. Um, Tacos al Pastor is a famous Mexico. This is specifically like Mexico City originated. This is pork, spiced pork on a spit like this, and then typically there'll also be like maybe a pineapple on top, and then they shave off the pork, put it on a tortilla with a little piece of pineapple, and that's a taco al pastor. This specifically comes from Lebanese immigrants to the city. So if this looks anything like gyro or kebab or what have you, that's because it is. It's the same thing. Comes from the same diaspora from the Eastern Mediterranean. It's just in Mexico, in the South especially, it's more of a pork based diet. So they changed it from lamb, or well, it's pork in Greece, I guess, but they changed it from lamb or whatever uh, they would eat in like Lebanon specifically to pork. And then here's the end result. This one has guacamole on it as well. Um, Mexico City is inland, obviously. So some folks might be averse to seafood, but not me. This is one of the best fish tacos I've ever had from a place called Mi Compa, which is there's two locations. One's in Roma and one's in Coyoacan. I visited the one in Coyoacan, and I'm gonna go back. And then this is one of those like street food huaraches I was talking about a minute ago. I should have put this slide earlier, but you get whatever you want added to it, and then it looks like this, and it'll fill you up for the whole day. Oh yeah, and dessert. So churros, it's like an elephant ear situation at a carnival. It's just fried dough. There's a famous place. Oh, what's the name of it? I forget. But if you look up churros Mexico City, it's going to be the top result. It has a bunch of locations, and you go there and you ask for your churro, and then they say, "Do you want it in white sugar or cinnamon?" And then you say whichever one you want, and then they say, what sort of dipping sauce do you want? And they have like caramel, condensed milk, chocolate, or guava. Obviously, here I went with well, I don't remember what's on the churro, cinnamon maybe, and then this is the chocolate dipping sauce. Um, okay, last section before we move on to the end here. So I mentioned I was here a few weeks ago. I was here for the World Cup. I got tickets to that the game that wound up becoming Mexico versus England. I bought them from FIFA. I won a lottery when they first went on sale months and months and months and months ago. So I did not pay the crazy resale prices. I paid face value. I got really lucky. It was a really cool game. Um, but folks who weren't going to the game, every single plaza in every single neighborhood had a setup like this with the projector, and folks would just watch all the games here and hang out with their families. So the atmosphere was really cool all weekend. This is my view from my seats. I was the fifth row from the very, very back. So trust me, I wasn't getting these fancy seats. This picture is zoomed in. But it was a great time. This is Estadio Azteca, which is very well known in the world of soccer as like one of the best stadiums with the best atmospheres. And I can now personally attest that that's true. Obviously, if you were paying attention to the World Cup, you know that it was not good news for Mexico that game. They lost. It was a fair game at least. But you can see here the next day, the newspapers all came out and they were lamenting the loss of Mexico. And then yeah, last slide before Q&A costs. So I mentioned the airfare is 300 to 600 depending on the airline and how um, the lower cost airlines are going to have the smaller seats, no TV, probably a little delayed, and then the higher cost ones are going to have you know also small seats, maybe a TV, and then also probably delayed. So it's up to you what route you want to go. Ubers are available all the time. They used to be really cheap. This last time I went, now they're sort of expensive. It's like 10 to 20 bucks. It's comparable to Ubers. Well, no, it's still cheaper than Ubers around here because I was taking Ubers that were like 45 minutes long and it was like $15. Obviously, it would be a little more than that here, but the Ubers used to be like 5, $6 anywhere you went, and now they're like 15, 20. So just keep that in mind if you're going to Uber a lot. Mexico City also has a subway system, which I only alluded to briefly. It's relatively well connected and reliable. I've taken it a few times and I do recommend it. But, I can understand if someone who's new to the city wants to stay above ground and just Uber from place to place. So it's really up to you. Um, Same thing, hotels and Airbnbs. This is a wide range. I think you can get a cheap Airbnb still for something like $60, but it's going to be at the lower end of that spectrum. I'd say a more average price would probably be like 80 to 100 a night is what I would budget if you don't have like luxury tastes. And then obviously there's hotels that are like thousands a night if you want it, but I'm not going to put that down. You can read the rest here. Dinner's, obviously anywhere you want it to be. $5 for something off the street, or 20 bucks for like a, halfway decent restaurant, or you can spend a few $100s at a fancy place. Um, Beer and cocktails, same thing. Coffee in the morning, you can go down the street for a $2 coffee, or you can go to like touristic cafe, and they'll whip something up for you for more like $5. And that's it. That's the end. So why don't I stop sharing and I can move on to the Q&A. Let's see. Okay, great question. Anonymous attendee, how serious and pervasive is the anti-gentrification movement towards foreign digital nomads and expats? It's pretty pervasive. You've probably seen, I mean, obviously you're asking, so you've probably seen like inklings of it in the US press or like on social media. There was a there's an article in I think like the New York Times that went sort of viral last year because it was talking about Roma and Condesa and how like the locals were upset because and this was their metric. They're like, you can't get spicy salsa in this neighborhood anymore because the tourists come down and they say, oh, it's too spicy, and they complain, so the restaurants just stop serving it. And that's sort of like I mean, it's innocuous in the sense that like, okay, it's just the spiciness of the salsa, but it's also indicative of like how trends change, like, cultural output over time. And you will be in these neighborhoods and you'll probably see at some point like graffiti that says like Fuera Gringo or Gringo Go Home. Uh, or I saw one that specifically said like end tourism to Xochimilco. So like the neighborhoods are affected by it. Um, um, it's something, I mean, we all struggle with, right? Like whatever your comfort level is of like, you know, being a tourist in somebody else's land, you can either like be a jerk and just barrel through and treat servers like dirt, or you can like try to tip well and just act like you're a guest in somebody else's home, and maybe that's better. Um, it's really up to you on that front. But it is something that they think about there. Did you always stay in Mexico City Old District? No, I've never stayed in the historic center. I've only stayed in Zona Rosa. I've stayed in La Condesa and Roma, and then I've stayed in Coyoacan. I wouldn't stay in the Old District or the historic center again because it's too much like hustle and bustle. You get down on the street. It'd be like staying in the Loop in Chicago. It's just not my style. I'd rather stay in a place like Andersonville or like Lincoln Park or something where there's like greenery and walkability and and so on. And then I'd visit the old district, for whatever purpose I'm going there for. Can you eat street food safely? Yeah, I've never had a problem with anything I've eaten down there. I would say, I mean, the rule of thumb is like if there's people, if there's a line for the street food, then it's safe because they're turning over the food, and it's popular for a reason. It's not making everybody sick. Maybe if you're averse, just avoid the one where there's nobody around. Maybe they're packing up for the end of the day and you're getting like the last trimmings and it's been sitting out a while. Like just use some common sense. But yeah, the street food's totally safe. It's all cooked food. Um, you feel safe, but are there concerns about thefts or other personal safety? No, not really. Not in any of these neighborhoods. I mean, pickpockets are everywhere. Like when I take the subway, I make sure my phone's deeply entrenched in my pocket. Um, when I'm walking around in a crowd, I have my hands in my pocket, stuff like that. But never once have I caught somebody like eyeballing me or like giving me a look or like that guy looks like trouble. All of these places I've outlined today in this presentation, I've only, without exaggeration, I've only ever felt 100% safe in. Do they do tours of the Aztec ruins in the center? And if so, is worth it? Yeah, they do. Like when you go to that museum, well, I don't know if you're talking about the museum specifically with the temple or like the historic center as a neighborhood. But the answer is yes to both. There are tours. I've never done one. But to the question, is it worth it? I bet that it is. If that's something you want somebody to guide you on, I would say it's probably absolutely worth it. Just, Google tours in Mexico City Centro Historico and read some reviews and have at it. I'm quite sure it's worth your time. For single women, obviously, I can't speak to personally. I've gone with my wife 6 out of the 7 times. She's not a single woman either, but she has gone out singularly when she said, I'm going to go out and get coffee and I'm laying in bed or whatever, something like that. And she's always felt safe. She's gone there once. Actually, here's a better metric. She went there with her sister once without me, without any guy, and they felt safe the whole time too. Obviously, there's two of them, but they were both to the to anybody else's observation, potentially two single women, and they had a great time with nothing negative to report. So I think the answer to that is generally yes. It's safe. You seem to eat all kinds of food. Is the street food safe? Oh, yeah. So it's a repeat question. Yeah, street food is totally safe. General feeling towards Americans. I mean, I think that answer is much of the world over bad right now. Probably Mexico more than a lot of other places. Uh, that being said, I mean, how many deep political conversations are you going to get in with somebody on this trip where they're going to make you feel unwelcome by espousing these feelings or beliefs? Probably not going to happen. So I wouldn't worry about it like in the sense that it's ruining your trip or anything. Nobody's going to spit at you or, whatever. I got a comment once. I was standing in someone's way. Um, so I don't know if that's the impetus for it, but they said in Spanish, they said fuera gringo, which means get out, American. Um, and for a second, I was like, oh, that's, I thought I was, just hanging out, but no, I had to worry about it for a second. But, at the end of the day, it's their home and I was standing in their way. So they might have just been saying it like, get out of my way. But it's certainly something that, you know, again, people are thinking about. Um, Water not potable. Yeah, I wouldn't drink out of some random tap. That being said, the last time I went, my Airbnb just had a filter on the kitchen sink, and you could drink it like that. It's just a filter that they attach to the nozzle under the sink, and they change the filter out, however often they do, and you can drink straight from the tap like that. So it's a problem that's been remedied for all intents and purposes. Just make sure if you're going to drink out of the sink, uh, there's a filter, or just go down to the 7-Eleven and get a big bottle of water if you want one. And that's it for questions. I don't know if we're welcoming like questions from the audience, Joe. We've only got a few minutes left, and I know you wanted to say some stuff too.
Yeah, looks like we got no more questions. So, Derek, thanks again for presenting, and everyone, thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.